during the week last week to kind of reach out a little bit and relieve your concerns about your coursework. I don't think that coursework is the most important thing when we're all sitting in our houses without electricity. So I tried to alleviate that, and I figured once things solidified and we got back to regular schedule that we would figure things out. So I spent some time over the weekend figuring out how to rearrange the schedule so that any work that you've already done is still counted, and also to allow for the fact that we missed a whole week. So I had to take a couple of things off of the calendar, and a couple other things I had to move around a little bit. So there are some changes, and I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to ask any questions about those changes. If you look on the calendar, you can, click on the calendar from the main page over here on the Blackboard. But this is where I did most of the shifting, just so that we can see what's going to be happening on each day. So what I did was I basically moved our discussion of Othello. We're going to finish up Othello this week, from last week to this week. So I just moved everything down, and I moved the due date for discussion number 3 to yesterday, but I'm allowing for people who might have issues with connectivity. Let's just try to get those all wrapped up by the end of this week or this weekend. There is not a discussion this week. I took it off so that we would have an opportunity to clean up discussion number 3. So if you haven't had a chance, like maybe you posted on the 12th before we had our storm, your response, but you haven't had a chance to go back in and do your replies, or, there have been issues, you can just take the rest of the week to do that. And I will look at them maybe at the end of the week. It was really hit or miss when I looked to see who was able to do that. And I just don't want to grade them until everybody's had a chance to do all their replies. So I put the due date for yesterday, but I know there are still some issues. So if you get that done through the week, let's just say, by the end of the weekend, then I should be able to go back in and grade those after the fact. We do have, this is a B week, so we do have class on Friday. On that day, I plan to talk about essay number 1, which I also delayed. I moved it 2 weeks into the future. I'll show you on the March thing, or you can flip to the March thing, but I'll talk about it in a second. I want to talk about essay number 1, what the expectations are. I talked about it a little bit last Thursday also. So if you were here, you heard me talk about, introduce it. But by now you should be starting to think about which topics you want to do. We'll be finishing up with Othello this week, so you should be able to really start figuring out which topic you want to write about and start thinking about your ideas that could go into your paper. So on Friday this week, we'll talk about, how that's coming, if there are any questions. And I also want to talk about the midterm on Friday. So on Friday, I will make the study guide for the midterm available to you. I will go through it. I'll talk about how the test is constructed, how it's going to work, how much time you'll have, when it is, and all that sort of stuff. So do make sure that you have Friday on your schedule, or that you go back and watch the video from Friday so that you can be informed about that. In terms of moving things around, another thing that I did was, good morning. Oh, good to see you. Another thing that I did was I took off 2 of the discussions. I know you're going to be disappointed. Dry the tears from your eyes, because I just had to take off 2 of the discussions. So instead of 12 discussions this term, we will only have 10. If you are beside yourself with grief about that, you can communicate with me and I will find alternative assignments for you if you would like. But I don't think anybody's shedding any tears over the fact that I reduced the number of discussions. I felt like 12 was a lot at the beginning anyway, but I went with the plan that the department has. And now I think with missing a week, it just didn't make sense. I took the one off that was planned for this week, and then I took another one off later in April because we're not going to end up reading the piece that it was associated with. I had to take something that was a week long out, and I took it out in April. So looking into next week, we're going to be finishing with the Renaissance this week, and we'll be working into the Restoration in the 18th century next week. So I'll do an intro, and then we'll read a little section of Paradise Lost. It's just book 1 and book 2. Book is a misleading term there. It's kind of like a longish chapter. And there will be discussion next week. The midterm exam is the week after that, right before spring break. Now, I didn't want to move the paper to the 21st because then it implies that you have to work on it. It was originally due February 28th. So that would be this Sunday coming up. And so obviously I wanted to move that just so you would have more breathing room on that. But moving it to the 21st implies that I'm expecting you to work on it over spring break, and that's going to be totally up to you. I'm not saying that you have to work on it over spring break. If you work on it and turn it in early, that's fine. The submission will be available to you as soon as Unit 3 opens up. So next Tuesday, when I start the next unit, all the material for Unit 3 will be there, and the submission for the essay is in with that unit. So you can definitely submit it early if you want to have a free and clear spring break, but I just felt like it was too short of a time with that crazy week that we had last week to make the paper due this coming Sunday. Then I thought, well, I could put it on the 7th, but I prefer you study for the midterm. So it's up to you. But those papers are going to be due on the 21st. We were supposed to do Gulliver's Travels before spring break and before the midterm, but I pushed those back. So the midterm will only cover through Paradise Lost. And we'll do Gulliver's Travels. We're only reading one part of Gulliver's Travels. We'll do that when we get back from spring break. What I took out, if you're interested, I don't even know if you've looked this far into the calendar, we were going to read Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness in May, and I took that out. I wasn't too sad to take that out. It's a pretty depressing piece, and I don't know. It's just going to make me even more depressed probably to teach it and for you guys to read it. So that's the piece I took out, and then I just rearranged everything else, and you can see that we're ending with the 10th discussion in May. So are there any questions about the rearranging of that? I don't generally like to rearrange things after they're stated in the syllabus, but I just didn't have a choice after last week. I'm looking in the chat to see if there are any questions about that. Okay. So today we're going to talk about Acts 3 and 4 in Othello. That is the climax and the falling action. And on Thursday, we'll talk about Act 5. Let me go to the study guide there. Act 3 is important because it's sort of like the setup for the downfall, right? If you want to, you can open your copy of the text. I have that here to refer to it. But you'll remember that at the end of Act 2, maybe you could be looking through the study guide in a few minutes. I'll talk about the two acts generally. And then if there are any questions on here that you want me to spend time talking about, I will be glad to do it. But Act 3 focuses on the setup for Othello's downfall and Michael Cassio's downfall by Iago. And in Act 3, we have this Iago plotting against them, and they have no idea. They have no idea the hatred that Iago has, but we do, because several times through the whole play, beginning really in Act 1, Scene 1, we have Iago who is expressing his anger and hatred for Othello and Cassio. Well, Othello more than anything at the beginning. Um, and we see several asides and soliloquies where he, directly states that he's going to manipulate them into a huge downfall. And so we see the workings of that happening in Act 3. There are some key elements to that. One is the relationship between Desdemona and Cassio. Their relationship is purely platonic and friend-like. They're affectionate with one another, but not in a romantic way. But because Iago notices that in Act 2 that they sometimes have, things that they tell each other, or, when Desdemona is waiting for Othello to see if he's going to arrive in Cyprus, she holds his hand, and he is going to manipulate that innocent relationship to make it look like it is not an innocent relationship. And he will be successful. This is a tragedy. And so there are a number of things that help him do that. One is the relationship between Desdemona and Cassio. Another one is the handkerchief, which comes into play in Act 3. Desdemona has a handkerchief that Othello gave to her. It was the first gift that he ever gave her when they were starting to court, or like get to know each other, or date, or nowadays we would say talking, right? And it's a very special handkerchief. It was his mother's, and it's distinctive. It's got strawberries on it. It's not just any old handkerchief. And Iago will use the fact that Desdemona loses this handkerchief to her advantage, and make it seem, and to his advantage, to make it seem like she had given it to Cassio, when she hasn't. He's just going to go to all the trouble of setting up that falsehood. And then he leads Othello directly. You can see in Act 3, he leads Othello directly to believe all of these things, that she's having an affair with Michael Cassio. And another element in that deception is the character of Bianca, who we don't really see until this act, really. And she is in love with Cassio, but Cassio is kind of like, ambivalent about her. And she is a prostitute, but she's instrumental also in Iago's framing of Desdemona and Cassio. Is there anything in the study guide for Act 3? Because I put Act 3 and Act 4 together for today. Is there anything in the study guide for Act 3 or 4 that you want me to specifically discuss? You can just put the number in the chat, or you can send me in a private message if you want. All right, well, add any numbers if you feel like it. I want to mention that there are characters in Shakespeare that are called clowns sometimes, and that can be a little confusing when you're reading. They come up in Romeo and Juliet, they come up in Hamlet, and they're here also in Othello. A clown is not necessarily a clown like we would consider like with the circus. It's usually just a character with less education. Sometimes they're musicians that are just goofing around, or it could be a drunk person, but it's usually designed to lighten the mood of the scene. So when they say clown, they don't mean like hilarious clown. They just mean somebody who is breaking the tension, I guess we could say, of the scene. All right, Act 4, Scene 1. Okay, Scene 1, Question 1. All right, Act 4. So Act 4, Scene 1, During his conversation with Iago, Othello suffers a physical ailment. What happens and how does this characterize Othello? Okay, so Othello has this sort of seizure. Let's go to that in the text at the beginning of Act 4. It's weird that they never mention that he has this this issue, this physical ailment. But as he's talking to Iago, and Iago at this point is still you know, deep into his manipulation of convincing Othello that Desdemona has been unfaithful, and Othello is buying it. He believes it. He says he needs ocular proof, meaning I can't just take your word for it, because Iago says stuff like, well, I heard him muttering in his sleep one time, and you know, that's not proof. So Othello says, I need ocular proof, and that's where the handkerchief comes in. And also, anytime that Desdemona and Cassio are together, Iago will play it off to Othello and bring his attention to it so that he can see that oh, look, they're over there. Oh, look how fast Michael Cassio walked away when he saw you. There must be something. Hopefully there's nothing going on there. I hope there's nothing going on there. I don't think there's anything going on there. And it's all planting this seed in Othello. And so here in Act 4, Scene 1, Othello and Iago are having a conversation, and Iago is, you know, continuing that campaign to besmirch Desdemona's character and therefore ruin Othello. And so he's starting to suggest, you know, that maybe they're in bed together, and you know, all these sorts of things. And it sort of throws Othello into a bit of a fit. They call it a trance here in the text. This is page 29 of the PDF, 608 in the text there. And so he starts to like react to the idea that Desdemona might have been unfaithful. I mean, they just got married. So it's kind of, you know, overwhelming for a groom to start thinking that his wife was already sleeping with his best friend and honored, trusted associate until Act 2. But so he starts saying, lie on her, lie with her, you know, oh, this is the worst thing ever, handkerchief. And he works himself into a fit where he just sort of has a seizure and just sort of stares into space. We'll watch the video either today or on Thursday of the ending part of the play. Maybe Thursday would be better, because we have 2 acts to get through today. But so what he just sort of stares into space, or sometimes, you know, he sort of like passes out like that a little bit. It just depends on the director's preferences in the version of the play that you're watching. But as soon as he falls into a trance, Iago says, it's working, right? And then Cassio comes in and they're like, what should we do? Do we rub him on the temples? How do we get him out of this? And so there's this opportunity for Iago to work with Cassio, and in his as Othello is in his stupor. So how does this characterize Othello? Well, he's obviously overwhelmed with the thought that his wife could be unfaithful. I think that he, you know, their love was true and pure and still is, but it really overwhelms him that she would do this to him. And it also tells us that he's believing Iago. And so his trusting nature works against him in 2 ways. He trusted Desdemona and their wedding vows, and he trusts Iago, who is feeding him a whole bunch of lies and deceit in order to convince him of this horrible falsehood. You do get a little tip off that Othello has this issue, this physical issue. When Desdemona loses her handkerchief in Act 3, she sort of she drops it because Othello says, I have a pain in my head right here. And she goes to, like, massage his temples or whatever. And that's when she drops the handkerchief. So you do have a clue that he has I don't know, they wouldn't have known about migraines back then or seizures, but he's got some sort of disorder like that. Okay, I don't see anything else in the chat. Is there anything else that you want to talk about from Act 4? Act 4, Scene 1, question 15. Act 4, Scene 1. Okay, this one right here. Yeah, so it's a quote. Is the noble Moor, whom our full Senate call all in all sufficient? Is this the nature whom passion could not shake? Whose solid virtue the shot of accident nor dart of chance could neither graze nor pierce? Okay, so in that scene, let's go and find that here. Othello starts to, is this still scene 1? Yeah. Othello starts to act in really erratic, and it's right here on page 614, really erratic ways. He cannot handle the surprise of this situation that he perceives between, or that Iago has made him to perceive between Desdemona and Cassio. And so he is starting to yell and be not of sound mind. And in this scene, Lodovico shows up. Now he's from Venice, and so he shows up and he sees the Othello, who is upset about his wife and what he believes has happened. And so he says, is this the noble Moor whom our full Senate call all in all sufficient? He's distressed to see Othello losing it. And so he's saying, is this the guy that we put in charge of all of our troops to send to Cyprus? Is this the guy that's the best general that Venice has to offer? He's completely deranged. And, so we're supposed to notice a character shift because Lodovico literally brings it up here in Act 4, Scene 1. Whom passion could not shake. Is he the guy who was such a steady leader that nothing would deter him from his goal, right? So from this, we're supposed to understand Othello's grief in finding out or believing that his wife has been unfaithful. We never would have questioned him a few weeks ago. Anything else from any of the scenes? I'm assuming that you've already looked over this study guide to make sure that you were reading sufficiently, but there can always be a couple that you wanted to talk about. Or I think one of the interesting characters that we see developing a lot in these most recent acts is Emilia, the wife of Iago, and the position that she's put in, because she's a caretaker for Desdemona, but she's also the wife of Iago. And Iago definitely uses her to his advantage. She's the one who brings him the handkerchief. And so her conflict is an interesting one. Shakespeare doesn't develop it much in the text. It's not like she has a soliloquy or anything like that. But we can imagine that Emilia is torn because at some point she starts to see that what her husband is doing is severely detrimental to Othello and Desdemona and Cassio, and ultimately will cause their death. And just the fact that Iago is willing to use his wife in that way tells us something also about Iago's character. So it's kind of important to notice Emilia for that reason. she's helpful to her husband, but then, she's got to be starting to wonder what are the effects on the relationship, and who she's supposed to be loyal to. Is she supposed to be loyal to Desdemona, who she knows to be honest, or is she loyal to her husband, who is not? And so I don't know. I feel like there should be a whole separate play just for Emilia and her struggles. All right, I do think that it's important. Oh, I like to put pictures on here sometimes. I know they're really old-fashioned pictures, but it's because I've used these in the past and copied them off for the class to have a paper copy, and black and white tends to do better. But here you can see Iago is talking with Othello, and you can see by Othello's reaction that this is one of the parts where Iago is really like drilling into him about Desdemona and talking about what if she's in bed with him, and what if, making more out of their relationship than there really is. And you could see that Othello's reaction to that there. So Iago really works his magic and his evil deeds on Othello, and you can see the results of it in that scene. Key concepts. I hope that you're keeping track of these. I say things like this sometimes because I know it's on the midterm, and you will too on Friday, but when I go over the study guide. But it will be important for you to trace these different sort of concepts through the play. The midterm is structured so that you will randomly be given different things from our course of study so far up to Paradise Lost. And one of the things that is rotated in there, like there's 100 things in the database, and whatever 15 you get out of those 100 is random. And you might be asked to discuss a theme in Othello, and you can use any one of these key concepts to explain that, right? So for example, if we talk about jealousy, there's a lesson that is learned in the play about jealousy. What is that lesson, and how does the play develop that lesson? So if you could randomly get a question like that. So if you have already been thinking about how do some of these ideas continue and maybe get more complex as the play goes on, then you'll already have good ideas and answers if one of those questions comes up in the short answer section of the test. The midterm is not a multiple choice test, it's a written test. So there are short answers that are like 4 to 5 sentences, and then there are essays that are like 10 plus sentences. So you are going to have to write on various topics that you'll randomly be selected from all of the different terms and concepts that we've been working on so far. So I know I talk about this each time we have a study guide, but it's just because I want to emphasize that if you've already thought about that, those questions, if you get one like that, would be much easier to handle. Are there any of these that you want me to talk about a little bit so far, like up until this point in the play? I think most of them are pretty obvious. Anything else from the study guide? I think it's important to watch the remainder of the film, but we don't have time for it today. So what I'd like to, war. Yeah, so war, there are different types of war. We have the literal war that the Venetians set out for, and the reason that they even go to Cyprus. Cyprus is kind of an exotic, remote location. So in some ways, we can say that the wild emotions that Othello experiences, and maybe even Iago in his jealousy, get intensified in this, wild exotic location. So there's the war with the Turks that they go there to defend, but there are other types of war. I mean, Iago is definitely waging war against Othello and Cassio. Desdemona's like collateral damage. He's not trying to punish her, but she's going to be punished anyway. She's his method, his instrument, I guess. And so there are other types of war. There's the war of words that happens between Desdemona and Othello, as Desdemona is trying to convince Othello that he should reinstate Cassio. And Othello is very angry about that because he thinks she's just interceding for her lover. And because by then he's been convinced by Iago that they're together. And so there's that war of emotions that happens there. I could even maybe make a case for, as I was saying earlier, the character of Emilia and how she has an internal war going on in terms of her loyalties. And so, you know, that kind of, in a way, mirrors Othello, but Othello believes it pretty quickly, which is sort of surprising, but it's a tragedy. So Shakespeare has to get there somehow. But you can think of, what I'm saying is you can think of war in multiple ways, not just, you know, like an army and an army. You can think about other types of wars, conflicts that occur. Yeah, so what I was saying was that I think what we'll do on Thursday is wrap up the play with Act 5. So read Act 5. A lot of people die in Act 5. I'm just going to tell you right now, it's a Shakespearean tragedy. So, you know, it's a lot of build up and then a whole lot of people dying on the other side of it. And then we'll watch we've watched through scene 2, I think, Act 2. So we'll watch Acts 3, 4, and 5 together on Thursday. And then on Friday, we'll talk about the paper and I'll have the midterm review ready for you. Are there any more questions from the study guide? Just FYI, some of these quotes do show up on the midterm. Some of the midterm short answers are, here's a quote from Othello, who said it, what's the circumstance, what's the significance to the play. There'll be significant quotations, but obviously I've already pulled out significant quotations from the play scene by scene and given them to you here. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are a couple of key ones, you know, like number 19 is pretty significant, that are important to the play. And so then you'll have to say who said it, context, why it's important to the play. But I'm already giving you the pool from which the midterm will pull. All right, then read Act 5 if you haven't already. Maybe you got ahead in your reading when the power was out. And I will see you for class same time, and we'll watch the remainder of the film. Also look at the study guide for Act 5 too, so that you can think about which questions you might want to ask. All right. If there isn't anything else, then I'll sign off for today, and I will see you on Thursday, okay? Have a good day, everybody.